Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the Growth Accelerator series. For anyone who is new around here, I am Marina Cull. I'm the head of marketing here at Incendium, and every week we bring on anyone related to any area of expertise connected to B2B growth challenges, opportunities, and today we're very excited to have Jake Citrano on with us. He is the founder and go-to-market recruiter at Closed One Talent, and that company is focused on helping growing companies unlock more revenue and greater efficiency through tailored sales and go-to-market talent acquisition. So if you can't surmise from that, Jake is going to be helping give some frameworks and insights into how early stage companies can build an effective sales team. Since, I don't think it takes a genius to realize that if you don't have an effective sales team, your company probably isn't going to make it very far. So very excited to have you on today with us, Jake.
Thanks, Marina. I'm excited to discuss sales hiring for founders. So I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always a little bit helpful just to kind of get a bit of a person's background and story before we kind of dive into some of the more meat of our conversation. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what inspired you to start Closed One Talent, and I guess how your experience has helped to shape your approach to sales hiring.
Yeah, I actually started my career for a short time, not even 2 years in sales. And then I got connected with a sales recruiter who's now my current partner, Jay Green. At the time, he was helping me find a new job, and it just so happened that he was looking to hire. And, he asked me if you ever thought about sales recruiting. And at the time I did not, but the role sounded cool. So I started doing it. I really enjoyed it, and I've been doing it for a number of years now. But what inspired Closed One is through those several years recruiting, I've really enjoyed working with founders directly at early stage startups, seed, series A, and equipping them, making sure that they're hiring the right people, helping them solve the challenge of who to hire, but also delivering the talent to those specific founders or earlier startups.
I know you mentioned, helping them hire the right people, right? So I'd love to know, would you say that in general, there are qualities that you look for when you're saying like, this is the right type of person for every early stage company to hire? Or would you say it's more like case by case, depending on the company, who they should be hiring?
It's a little bit of both, right? Like each company, there's definitely different qualities that matches their culture or their selling motion or what they're trying to accomplish with their sales team. But at the same time, there are traits that every startup should look for when hiring early salespeople, right? It's different. Joining an early stage company as the first, second, or third salesperson is a lot different than joining a company with a larger brand where they have playbooks. It might be easier to sell, and there's just a lot more figured out. So yes, there are some characteristics that I think every startup should look for.
Yeah. Can you break down some of what those are? So if a company is, putting together either getting their first salesperson or maybe like that first handful of people that are going to form the backbone of the sales division for the company, what are the qualities that people should be looking for?
Yes, starting with qualities that aren't necessarily experiences. I think obviously somebody has a strong work ethic, right, is important and is a self-starter. But I think the one thing that doesn't get as much acknowledgement is natural curiosity. Somebody that can really jump into a situation at an early stage startup and, if not already, is passionate, can become very passionate about the space that they're selling into and the day-to-day of the buyer that they're selling to. You tend to see reps have the ability to ramp up a lot quicker when they do have that curiosity and passion, right? They're able to learn faster, but also they're able to sell more because they're able to gather enough information to consultatively sell to those buyers.
You actually just answered my question, because I was wondering if you were going to say, like, is it just the, figuring out the company, figuring out the product itself or whatever service you might be selling or whatever, or is it actually like live curiosity in the sales call that makes an effective salesperson?
Yeah, exactly. It's curiosity before the call, during ramping up, right? Like a founder is not going to be able to tell a salesperson when they start every single bit of information. So it's important that they are driven through curiosity and passion to figure out the information that they need, and beyond that, be able to be a true resource for stakeholders within a sales process. Because if not already, they're their goal is to really know not only what they're selling, but who they're selling to inside and out.
Yeah. I'd love to know your thoughts on, obviously we just talked about a quality that a salesperson should possess in order to be effective. But when it comes to hiring, and I think this is particularly relevant for early stage companies, right? Because depending on the company, depending on what kind of like fundraise they're working with, right? Like they may or may not have a lot of resources to work with when it comes to hiring like top talent. What should companies be looking for when they're trying to balance finding someone with like a really, specific or compelling set of experiences in their professional career versus someone that they see potential in and attracting talent that maybe is a little bit newer to the game?
Yeah, I think at this stage, you want to hire for you want to hire folks that have had success in a similar role, maybe not in as early stage of a startup, but has had success in a similar type role selling. So I think the most important thing is alignment, right? And where you want to be aligned is definitely the industry, assuming that the industry is broad enough that there's a large talent pool, right? It's going to be a lot easier of a ramp up. It's going to be a lot easier to evaluate the candidates in the interview process if they're coming from the same space, whether that be cybersecurity, DevOps, MarTech, to name a few. The other thing that's important is someone that's had success selling in the same selling motion, right? So someone who has sold into a similar ICP in terms of account size or industry, somebody that has the same or has had success within the same selling motion and deal size, right? Whether that be at 50K or 100K, having alignment there is important as well, because they'll be able to start faster, but also start to create some scalable processes because they've had success there in the past. Anything I should elaborate on that?
I mean, anything you want to, but I think you hit on some helpful points. I did want to ask too. So if we're looking for people who have a lot of experience, have some proven successes when it comes to, like you said, like selling into an industry, selling to a particular kind of ICP. My guess is that is because you're looking for someone who can get you immediate wins, right?
I think so, right? I think immediate wins, but I also think it's very important that you want to make sure this person has long-term success as well, right? Like the biggest disaster that can happen is in 6 months, it's not the right fit on either side. And the risk is a lot less if you're hiring someone that has a better idea of the job that they're going to be asked to do from day one. And sometimes that's just too hard when, if you're going to sell at, I'll use cybersecurity as an example again, if you've never sold cybersecurity before and you're looking to do so, it will be not only more challenging to start, but there's a lot more risk that 5-6 months into it, maybe selling to that technical type of persona isn't for the salesperson. Right. So then they have to start all over and find a new rep, even if they had success.
What about when it comes to, I imagine that as you are adding the first few salespeople to an early stage company, right? You're simultaneously trying to drive revenue both now and in the long term. But I would imagine it's also pretty imperative that you're trying to hire in a way that's going to build the type of organizational culture that you're looking to, because those first few people are going to have such a profound impact, I guess, on shaping the overall company culture. So how important would you say it is to like balancing between those two things, right? Of like, can the person do their job versus are they a good fit here for the type of company that I want to build? And along with that, in the sales process, in the hiring process, how do you suss out those kinds of like that balancing act?
Yeah, it's very important, right? To find someone that matches the early culture that's built at the startup. And I think where a lot of founders might make a mistake is because even if they are doing the right thing by looking for folks that have very adjacent selling experience, it sometimes makes a candidate pool a lot smaller. So it's harder to really hire the right culture fit as well. So, I think the advice there would be to not be so concerned about hiring someone at a specific compensation, because then there's going to be candidates that are looking for more comp or even looking for less comp. I would open that up a little bit more wider, whether they're a 3-year candidate and can do the job or a 7-year candidate, to make a larger compensation benchmark. That way you can get a larger candidate pool and can really make sure the person that you're coming in has the right fit, has the right skill set, and is sold and had success in that area, but also emulates that culture fit that you're looking for. In terms of evaluating it, it's hard to make a scorecard, right? How can we tell if this person is a culture fit? So I think making sure that all interviews aren't the same exact style is a way
Mm-hmm.
to catch that, right? You might think someone's a culture fit through 2 interviews, but then if you use like a 30, 60, 90-day assignment, for example, as a third interview step, you might understand after that third interview that there might not be alignment in the way the person thinks, right? Or the
Mm-hmm.
way that person thinks the first 30, 60, 90 days should go. So that's one way to really make sure that you're going to be aligned culturally with who you're hiring.
Yeah. If it came down to two final candidates and a company was, like a founder was looking at hiring someone who was a better fit on, like the set of experiences that they bring, but less of a culture fit. And then you had the second candidate, right, who was the reverse. Do you, generally speaking, advise people to go one direction or the other, or is it really just a case by case and whichever the founder kind of feels is the better candidate for them?
It probably has to be a case by case, right? If it's a situation where, the candidate who does feel like a strong fit on paper doesn't match the culture fit at all, then you definitely don't want to move forward with that hire. If it's a situation where someone's a perfect culture fit and they might not have the experiences and the founders don't feel confident that they're able to onboard or provide the training to catch them up to speed, then you don't want to go with that person either. So I guess to answer your question, I think at this stage, you don't want to have to choose. It's not really a give and take. You want to keep going until you find the right person, right? Even if that means rejecting both candidates and starting the search again and maybe opening up the pool a little bit, whether that's higher compensation, going nationally instead of trying to find someone in a specific city, right? There are plenty of ways to do that as well.
I want to circle back to, you just referenced it again, but right, like kind of opening up what the criteria are that you might be looking for when it comes to a person, specifically when it relates to compensation and like narrowing your pool a little bit too much as a result. Are there any other common mistakes that you see a lot of startups making when they're trying to hire their first few salespeople?
Yeah, I think one mistake that founders make, and maybe is not as much anymore because there's been a lot of content about this, is overvaluing someone coming from a larger company, right? It is a startup. So more often than not, it's very important that your candidate has had success in a startup environment with limited resources. At the same time, I do think some founders also make a mistake by totally disqualifying someone from a large company. Again, it's harder for them, but if someone was I'm trying to find an example right now. Since we're sticking with cybersecurity, I'll use Rapid7, and they've been the top performer there, right? 3 years in a row and are a true A+ player. They're going to be great in a startup too, right? Sure. Even if they have less resources. So I would say be careful of it, but also on the other end, don't automatically disqualify someone because they don't have early startup experience. But if you're going to go with someone, you have to make sure they're truly a top performer and have to understand why, or have to be convinced that they would have success without those resources through the interview process.
So let's say, we've talked about it a little bit, but let's say you're dealing with a situation where the hiring process has been going on for a little bit and no clear-cut winners are really coming through the process. How do you recommend startups deal with that, with the pressure to hire quickly versus the pressure of not bringing on the wrong person? How do they navigate that?
It's hard, right? Because I do see that as well. And it's a case-by-case basis. And if you don't have, the resources, right, to use a firm to make sure that you're going to get somebody quickly, then it does become a bit more challenging. I think one way to do that is look at if you can find fractional help, right, to bridge a gap. If there's any gaps that you can plug while you are looking for that hire, but also, kind of go back to the drawing board and understand if we can't find someone, with the exact experiences needed, right? What other traits or experiences would be very transferable, but on the other end, the candidates we're looking for would also be excited about our opportunity, right? I think that's why a lot of times hiring takes a little bit longer, especially if you're able to get the candidates into the process, is because there's not necessarily alignment with who the startup wants to hire and that profile being excited about that type of position. And that comes into compensation, how much traction, how many customers a startup has, how much momentum there is there any inbound support, or is it 100% outbound? So making sure that's aligned is key for a quick hiring process.
Is there a rule of thumb that you have of, this amount of time, if the hiring process is taking this amount of time, you're probably in the right zone, it should take roughly this long, versus, if you start to get past this point, you're probably, running into something and you need to problem solve because this is taking longer than it should. And then maybe a third point of you need outside help, for sure, this is not going okay. And do you think that Do you think that founders usually have a good sense of where they are on that spectrum, or do people feel maybe that they're in one place when actually, they're in a whole other section
Yeah,
of that kind of timeline?
that's a great question. I'll go back to just one thing I missed first.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
I think for founders, when you're not hiring, networking with salespeople is key, right? If you're at a
Mm,
trade show and you're just speaking with other sellers in the industry who are also at the trade show, even if you're not hiring, just getting to know them so you have maybe a little bit of a bench that you can reach out to when you do start hiring of folks in your industry. In terms of the length that a company should shoot for, I think, if everything is done right and goes smoothly, it should take a month.
okay.
Anything more than 3 months, there's a problem there, right? That needs to be
Hmm.
diagnosed, whether it's misalignment with who you want to hire versus who's interested in your job, or having trouble getting applicants. That's when you're going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out why aren't we filling this role?
Yeah, that's good. I love your point too about networking with salespeople, because I don't think, at least for me, that's not something that immediately comes to mind, right? As like a proactive piece, especially in a hiring process in general. Like before you really, maybe when you're in the founder-led sales mode or something, you can make sure that you're keeping an eye on the horizon of knowing like eventually this is going to have to get past me and I need to know kind of who's in the space. I know you mentioned trade shows. Do you have any other ways that or like spaces that founders should be in order to be around and able to network with the types of people that eventually they'd want to bring on their team? Because I imagine it extends beyond just salespeople as well. In general, it's you want to meet the right people that are going to be a good fit for your company.
Yeah, I think events, and then I also think just using right,
Yeah.
connecting with folks in the space, and starting some sort of high level dialogue. Usually, the founders that do that are also good at sourcing their own talent. So
Sure.
it's right, it helps them, but they're able to go find the salespeople on their own and reach out to them when they do have open roles.
Hmm.
So if you're not thinking about it as part of your strategy, I think trade shows is the easiest way to do it. Outside of that, it becomes more challenging. But anytime you're at some sort of industry event, just look out for salespeople, whether it's an event, a webinar, a group, a Slack channel, whatever it is, and make a relationship. Because even if it's not them,
When
they might know other folks, right, in the industry that
Yeah.
could be a good fit, and you can use them for referrals.
Yeah. What kinds of things should you be like? Let's say someone's at a trade show or other events, or just running into a salesperson or something in general who's operating within their space. Calling back all the way to the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned curiosity as one of that, like maybe the pinnacle of like qualities that a salesperson needs to possess. Is there anything that you can pick up on, I guess, in your person to person interactions as you're networking of like, oh yeah, like look out for these specific traits in your interactions, because that's the hallmark of an effective salesperson when it just comes to like networking, right? When they're not actively trying to sell you.
I think I know we spoke about curiosity already, but if you meet a salesperson and they seem very intrigued and interested in your vision, right? And you can get a lot of
Hmm.
that by the questions that they ask you. That's one way to know. And then you can also kind of spin it around on them and even, ask for help. Hey, I'm not a salesperson, right? I'm a founder trying to do sales on my own. What advice would you give me? And, through that, you'll probably get a sense the advice they give you. Oh, this person's an awesome, right? They're a rock star. They have a
Right.
process down versus
Yeah.
this person. I'm sure they're a great sales rep, right? But they might not have a consistent process, maybe winging it a little bit, and probably wouldn't be the best fit in an earlier company.
That makes sense. I'd love to know, this is circling back to something you talked about a little bit more, right? Like, if you're running into some issues in your sales process, or sorry, hiring process. Um, and let's say it's maybe not so much a misalignment on like, the type of person you want to attract and like culture fit and all that kind of stuff. Let's say it's coming to a head that like maybe compensation is an issue, right? Like you open it up a little bit more and it's still not attracting the type of talent that you want. Have you ever worked with companies that have gotten a little bit creative with the types of like compensation, maybe non-monetary compensation that they can offer? Do you have any tips or tricks for how companies, like early stage companies, can maybe like extend their resources a little bit farther and attract talent by getting out of the box?
Yeah, I think If you're strapped on base salary, again, it becomes harder, but there's some interesting stuff that you can do on the back end in terms of commission. Whether those rates are higher or there's accelerators, so you can really make the opportunity intriguing from a back end compensation standpoint. I do think the biggest mistake that founders make when hiring is everybody wants these A players, right? These very strong salespeople. And I get it because they live in their startup, right? They think their startup's the best. They have to be very reasonable, right? Would somebody who's doing great at maybe their Series B or even Series A company right now, why would they want to come over and sell with us, right? A lot of founders can't even answer that question on their own. And if they can't answer that question besides saying, we have this, great idea without like actual momentum that they have, it's going to be hard for them to close talent. So in that case, it might be better to get a consultant and wait till you can find the right person. Or you might feel, hey, we might not need this caliber of talent to have success, or we can go a bit more junior to at least pay someone more so it feels like a big step up. And maybe that could work as well.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, kind of, I guess, setting realistic expectations, because I do think you're right that founders live so intimately within the world of their company that maybe they want to bite off more than they can actually chew. But I think that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have one other? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and everyone, right? Every founder thinks their startup's great and is going to do awesome things, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you really have to be able to answer, right? If someone just made President's Club at their company and things are going great, and that's the type of person I want to hire, if we can't give them a great pay raise, right? Why would they make a lateral move to come work here?
Yeah.
Outside of there's great opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're running up against the clock. So I'd love to end on one last question, which is, we've covered a lot of different topics, but if you had to give one piece of advice to a founder who's just starting their sales hiring journey, what would that piece of advice be?
I think it's, maybe it goes back to that networking piece, but a step further, right? Learn how to source. And this goes against my source talent. This goes against my own business, right? Because founders hire us to do it. But I really do think there are some founders that have figured out recruiting, right? With a LinkedIn recruiter license that costs, $140 a month, and can self-generate a great pipeline, right? Reaching out to folks directly. And it seems harder than it is, right? Like I do think somebody that got lost in YouTube, right, and learned how to effectively use the tool could at least try that before spending money on outside resources. But the key is to start doing it earlier in case you fail, because you don't want to have to do that in a situation where you feel like you need someone in the next month, right? Because it might be a little bit longer of a learning curve if you're trying to do it yourself versus hiring a firm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's going to be hard to attract talent with job postings because of how small your brand is, but also how niche of a type of candidate you want, right? You're probably going to spend more time going through inbound applicants than you would if you were just to go out and use a tool like LinkedIn to go find the talent yourself. It might feel like more work, but I bet it ends up being less time and a lot better, a lot more effective if you go out and source on your own.
Well, I think that's a great place to end on. Thank you so much, Jake, for coming on today. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I think you've given a lot of really great pieces of recommendations for founders that are just starting out trying to hire their sales team. So thanks so much for coming on. And for anyone who's watching live or anyone who is tuning in the future on a recording, we are always here every Thursday for the Growth Accelerator series, typically at 12:30 Eastern, bringing on any and every expert that is able to speak on something relevant for founders, early stage companies driving growth and revenue at their businesses. So thanks so much again, Jake, and we'll talk again in the future.
Thanks, Marina. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Bye, everyone.